Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us today to stay curious with this gentleman, Mr. Gary Harris. Welcome, Gary. How you doing?
Fine, fine.
Third appearance for Gary on Stay Curious. He's our local spacesuit maker, but he's much more than that. He's a genius when it comes to life support systems, and you got the book to prove it. I think a big, thick book that you printed about this. So Gary's going to here today because I asked him to come and clear up the muddy waters because I thought a year ago NASA announced the new Artemis spacesuit, and then just a month ago they announced two other contractors, Axiom Space and Collins Aerospace, were going to build spacesuits. So I said, Gary, come on board and help us sort this out a little bit. So thank you, Gary. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you got involved in tinkering with life support systems.
Well, I was grew up around Mitchell, Indiana. That's the home of Gus Grissom.
Yeah, sure is.
And then lived in Kansas for many years and Texas, and went into the Army. And my last 3 years in the Army, anyway, I worked in the Nike missile system out at White Sands Missile Range and in Patriot. Then after the Army, I worked in life support systems. Then in 1995, I went to work for Lee Weaver. He was.
We'll show him here in a minute. We're going to get some old school picture showing for you here.
I don't know if that's Lee there or not. Yeah, that's Lee right there.
This is Lee Weaver there.
That's Lee Weaver. He was with NASA 16 years. He was an engineer, worked with them. He was one of the guys that worked up at the Marshall Space Flight Center in their tank up there, the water tank. He's one of the people that taught the astronauts how to drive the rover and how to do many of the EVAs and how to save the space station, the original space station.
Freedom?
No, long before
Skylab.
Skylab. Yeah, he was one of the people that worked out the technique for deploying, the Mylar cover. And so I started with him as his principal engineer. And then Lee was killed in an automobile accident, sadly, up at Indianapolis, Indiana. And we were working on a spacesuit system at that point for Roton, Rotary Rocket Company, who was a little bit like SpaceX, but just before that, but long before SpaceX. Anyway, that program cratered, and then I got together with Pablo De Leon, who's an Argentine engineer who was also had worked on high altitude technology, launch entry type suit technology, and with Hamilton Sundstrom and Bill Elkins at that time, and we were working on at that point a next generation, what they called NASA was calling the next generation spacesuit or EVA suit, and that all that went away too, as so much was in so much flux back in those days. And then at that point, Pablo and I started the Human Spaceflight Laboratory at the University of North Dakota. And originally it was a spacesuit lab, and now it's branched out more into other fields in the space field anyway. And I'm presently semi-retired, so I'm now working with them just more as a consulting role on their efforts to try to build mobility suit systems for EVA suits from using 3D printing.
Wow.
That's the present project that we're working on.
We have a sample of that out in our gallery. I forgot to put the picture of our Artemis style suit that you have on loan to us here. It's a major attraction in our Apollo gallery. Wanted to just Gary is an amazing guy. All these spacesuits behind us here. This is kind of a look through history. Explain what that is.
Well, that's Wiley Post wanted to. He was famous for flying around the world and for various pioneering flights back in the early days of aviation. And there was a race. I think it was between, if I remember right, it was between London and Sydney, Australia. And he understood some about the early jet stream when most people didn't. And Wiley wasn't an engineer; he was just a pilot. But he got together with B.F. Goodrich Company, and they built a high altitude pressure suit. What that was
based on a diving belt.
Well,
type thing in a way, right?
yeah, yes and no. The fabric was India fabric with coated with a rubber on the inside. It only operated at about 2.5 pounds per square inch. That's all it needed. But if you look at the helmet, it was made out of aluminum and it hooked up like an old-fashioned diver's
Yeah, I guess that's
heavyweight
the way you
rig.
think about
If
that.
you look at the face piece on it, it's kind of interesting. It sets off to one side because Wiley only had one eye. He was an
Oh.
oil field hand and he was using a 5 pound maul one day and it broke off a piece of metal and went in his eye and he lost his eye. So they had to put the eyepiece set off to one side. So,
Famous, lost his life with Will Rogers.
Will
in a
Rogers
plane
up in
crash.
Barrow, Alaska. Yeah.
Will Rogers was one of America's humorists at the
Yeah.
time.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Kind of a comedian there. But this is what our spacesuits look like now. Marty, we got a question, a comment?
You got people having problems. The signal, Carlin saying signal drops out bad today with watching from home. So Larry Puskar, my video was looping. So we're having some, you may want to mention
We're having some technical problems apparently. We don't know if it's the Wi-Fi in the building or what. So thank you. We noticed that yesterday and we'll get our IT guy on that. So bear with us. We're here with Gary Harris. He's got some news things of note, news breaking assessment talk about here in Collins Aerospace. Okay, and so want to ask Gary, why didn't just 4 weeks ago NASA chose their Crew and Thermal Systems division of NASA selected Axiom Space and Collins Aerospace for the XEMUS competition.
Mm-hmm.
So why were they chosen, Gary?
Well, let me go a little bit into why the XEMU, the original one, remember at NASA.
What's that acronym stand for?
NASA was that they were going to produce 2 suits in house.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 2 of the XEMUs in house, and that didn't happen. Now of course you remember a while back they were saying that it was the spacesuits that were going to hold up the lunar landing.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem was, like I said, they didn't feel like they were hitting the milestones they need to be hit. And so they come along with this program. And now this was not out of the blue. It may have seemed that way to the public, this XEMUS program.
Mm-hmm.
It had actually been planned for a year because at some point NASA was going to have to turn this suit program over to an outside contractor.
Okay.
They weren't going to be doing this in house. Okay.
But who are those subcontractors?
The 2 contractors that NASA chose to do this was Collins Aerospace and Axiom Space. And the reason that they were chosen is that they were actually the only 2 companies that actually submitted proposals.
Really?
Nobody else submitted.
Because people want to know why wasn't SpaceX selected?
Yeah, well, okay, well, I'll go into that presently. But
Okay.
NASA put out an RFI. That's a request for information, and only Axiom and Collins and a company called New Horizons Space, which I've never heard of, were the only ones that actually showed interest in this. And New Horizons submitted an early part of its proposal. Now, the early part of the proposal was that you had to submit what your history was and, what you've done in the past. Because NASA, as I've often said, they don't select a suit, they select a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, the only 2 people that had actually built suit systems, if you remember, was David Clark and Hamilton Sundstrom. Well, Collins Aerospace is actually is Hamilton Sundstrom. They were absorbed by them and then became United Technologies, and then they went through a whole bunch of other companies, and now they're called Collins Aerospace. I know it's really confusing.
Well, you need a scorecard to keep track of all the space industries since the beginning. They've merged,
broken
rebranded,
apart. And I had
a
friend of mine who used to work with Hamilton Sundstrom. I had him write down exactly who was what and how it had all. And I thought, well, I might talk about that, but it was so complicated, I decided to skip over that. Anyway, out of a possible 1,000 points, each of these 2 companies, let's see, Collins got 829 points as a grade from NASA and got a high level of confidence. that it would be able to complete the contract. And Axiom Space got 824 points, and with a moderate level of confidence that would be able to get the contract. Now, who these guys are, who the subcontractors are, is that Axiom Subcontractors is Paragon Space Development Corporation. Now, if you wonder who that is, you remember a while back there was a guy that made a high altitude jump.
Yes.
Not the first one, but the second fella. There was two of them. Two people did that. Okay,
Which guy wrote the book about it? That's what
that was him. And they used to be at the old Navy Yard in New York, and they build soft suit components. Dave Clark Corporation, you know, that you mentioned on here earlier, they're also involved in this as well with soft suit components. When I say soft suit components, I mean the components of the mobility joints, gloves, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Airlock, which is out of Connecticut, they're one of the contractors, and they're, for example, the helmet ring. If it's a rear entry type suit, they would probably be building the hard upper torso or parts of the hard upper torso, or at least the closure rings and that sort of thing. KRB, which bought Wiley Engineering and generally does engineering consulting, is one of the contractors, and they may be doing the outer thermal micrometeoroid garment, the seal garment for the lunar surface, but I know very little about KRB. I've had no contact with them. Sophic Synergistics is with them, APT Research, and in addition, a lot of, well, not a lot, but some of the folks that were ILC Dover that built the shuttle suit, and of course the Apollo A7, the A7LB suits for that, they have left and went to Axiom Space.
Oh, okay.
So Axiom has they have one part of the all of the people who've done work in the past sewn up. Collins is subcontracted with ILC Dover, Ocean International. If you remember Oceaneering, but I don't know what they're doing within the contract. Now, I've spoken to some of these contractors, and frankly, at this point, it's not been sorted out as to who's going to be doing what. That's the thing of it is that NASA is going to be the arbiter between these two. Now, when these companies, they'll get this 3.5 billion, this sort of seed money to help them develop this, but they also have to use their own money because it's not going to cover the cost of this. And what's going to happen is that NASA will be the arbiter on this, and then NASA will make a decision as to which one of these suit programs that it's going to go with. So I've had people ask me, you know, some of the SpaceX fan guys have asked me, well, why didn't SpaceX get in on this? Well, SpaceX didn't submit a proposal. So there's probably other reasons, and these are kind of my own way of looking at it. SpaceX has no history of building an extravehicular suit system. It's built a launch entry suit that it uses on Dragon. But from my 27 years of experience in this, the difference 71.
Oh, it's really that big?
You think about it. NASA first was begin to look at spacesuit technology because it knew if it was going to build a space station or whatever it was going to do, go to the moon, it knew it was going to need a spacesuit to do that because one of its earliest studies showed that. So they went to Litton Industries, which was the only company really building anything even similar to what NASA needed at that time. So that was 1958. And if you think about it, it took them all the way to almost 1967 before they really had a workable EVA that was actually an IEVA type suit for Apollo. You know, it was doing both functions. So that was you're talking almost 9 years there that it took it. But they had the Saturn V was flying as early as like 1966. So it actually finally building a workable EVA suit was harder and took more years, you see, than what it even took to build the Saturn booster. So it's hard. So that's another thing. If SpaceX had started on it, they would have been years behind these other contractors anyway. And another reason is that SpaceX already had a lot on its plate already. It's got Dragon, it's got the
Starship that they haven't figured out how to get the
yeah.
astronauts down that giant rocket.
Yeah, it's got a lot on its plate. Now, in the past, NASA has I'm not saying NASA said this to SpaceX, but in the past, NASA has told contractors, look, you're just too busy we don't want you involved in the project because you're too busy. So that happened to ILC, for example, back in the late Apollo period. NASA, of course, was originally planning for a science station on the moon as the part of the Apollo applications program. And so they had Air Research and Litton Industries building advanced EVA suits for that, and they were going to be used on Apollo 17, 18, 19, 20. But ILC wanted to get involved in that, but ILC was so busy with the A7LB suit that NASA said, no, you're too busy. We don't want you involved in this contract. So I'm saying NASA has done that before, so they were going to be awful busy. That's not saying that they couldn't have done it. That's just saying that's maybe possibly part of it. They, like I said, they had no history in it. How were they going to submit a proposal showing their history of building an EVA suit if they had no history in it? So, and that is one of the requirements of NASA, at least in that particular area.
I find it interesting, all these contractors involved, Gary. It's like building a car. Not you got all these other people that got the motors, that got the windshield motors, that got the wheels, that got all this stuff. Maybe you out there haven't thought about that one company doesn't have all of the expertise to build this. After all, a spacesuit is a satellite of its own in the harshest environment. But I don't know if space is that the harshest environment or underwater.
Well, I've had that argument with people before.
I wonder if there's an argument about people.
They have before.
Because Gary's very experienced scuba diver, but you also worked on nuclear.
Well, I wasn't a scuba diver. I was a commercial hard hat diver. For like
way beyond
years.
Scuba diving. He was a serious.
I did that. Yeah, I've had that argument before. I don't know. Space is a pretty harsh environment. I mean, if you think, especially the moon. The moon's going to be a tremendously harsh environment. You take when early in the space station program, for example, Hamilton Sundstrom and NASA did a study, what they called a sharp edge avoidance program. I think, if I remember properly, it was where they would map out places on the top, the outer hull of the space station, so that EVA when a crew member wouldn't get themselves hung up in something that was sharp or damage the suit. So now if you're going to the moon, it's going to be a really rough environment. You're not going to be able to pre-plan out where the where the dangers are going to be. You're just going to have to build a suit, frankly, that's rugged enough that can stand that kind of thing. That's something that I've talked about in the past as a consultant, is that are you going to be able to use these suits that we're now talking about building? Are you going to be able to use them long term on the moon? I mean, they may be fine for example, they may be fine for flags and footprints, for early in the program. But when you start wanting to mine, the lunar surface, especially at the South Pole, at the Shackleton crater where there's water, ice, because that is one of the requirements. If I remember, one of the requirements is that the suit has to be able to stand something like 240 degrees below zero for 20 minutes. Now that's if you're standing in a shadow in a crater, you see, because most of this mining will probably be done robotically. I don't think you could build a suit that could stand that kind of cold that long. That's kind of the problem. So this is, to me, I see the other day they were saying, well, they're going to use these suits all the way up for 30 years. I don't think so. Not on the moon, not if they're going to do all those things. But
we're talking with Gary Harris, who's an expert on spacesuits, and we're just 10 miles away from Kennedy Visitors Complex, where they got suits like these on display. Our American Space Museum prides itself in preserving the birth of America's space age and igniting the future generation, and that's what Gary's doing, giving us some latest information on these new spacesuits that are going to take a man and a woman to the surface of the moon in our Artemis program. Marty Winkle, my cameraman, co-producer, who worked on the lunar module in the Apollo program, and he knew where those spacesuits were going to be tucked in that ascent stage better than anybody in this building. Marty, we doing okay with our transmission? We had a few hiccups.
I'm still having problems.
So if we're breaking up and so forth, we'll get our IT guy on it the next tomorrow, because we've been noticing a few of that. Thank you for pointing that out. Larry Pushker's up in Michigan. We got Keith Soul. Thank you, Keith, for watching. Robert Law is watching us in Dundee, Scotland, Gary. He's seen you before. And Ophelia Sauterel, we to you, young lady. She's in Normandy, France. And Carlton Bailey's watching, probably his lap covered with his feline friends there. Tom Usiak, good to hear from you today. Ben Huset's watching, as is Chalid Zan. And we'll give a shout out to some other ones here, but let's get back to Gary. Gary, why isn't NASA using the existing shuttle and space station EMUs?
Well, for one thing, the shuttle suit was never designed to be a surface suit like you'd use on the moon. It doesn't have the mobility. For example, from the waist down, the shuttle really has very little mobility because it just doesn't need it in Earth orbit. You're going to use your arms, shoulders, elbows, wrists, and gloves most of the time for that.
Your leg is just a hook to hold on.
Yeah, it's just
basically.
all the shuttle suit really has is in mobility is it has if you can imagine this is my leg here. Well, it has knee mobility. It can a single plane flexion in the knee, and it has the ability for adduction, abduction, and flexion in the ankle a little bit. But it doesn't have the sophisticated mobility that you need. For example, you need straddle joint so that otherwise if you sit down, your legs will be spread apart. You need a straddle joint to pull your legs back together. You need a very sophisticated joint in the ankle. You need support in the ankle. You're going to have hip bearings because all the shuttle EMU has is just some brake lines in the hip. If you ever watch the shuttle EMU when it's in the robot arms, they can bend a little bit at the waist. That's about it. And the other side of it is that the single plane closure hard upper torso that the shuttle uses is not designed for hard bending at the waist. So not only that, but there just not enough components left of the shuttle MU that could be used for anything. So what they're going to do is that they're going to use this suit on space station.
So what will the architecture?
Let me show you.
Look like Marty. We're going to have you do our old school zooming in here a little bit.
Let me find some pictures.
Aaron brought
here.
a bunch of pictures in. We didn't. He's going to show you what some of the new suits look like. We can go through all those.
Well, here's a picture. I don't know.
Here, just let it sit right there, and Marty will zoom in on it.
Here's a picture of the shuttle EMU that says it's. You can see that this one here is the original. I'm sorry, I'm having to do this backwards. This is the original shuttle EMU, and you see the lower torso. There's really no mobility, no bearings.
Yes.
There's no brake line. There's hardly just brake lines in the hips. Here was the enhanced shuttle EMU, and you can see that they've added spacers, sizing spacers, and such, so it more easily can fit greater number of people. Okay, so you can see the problem there. It just doesn't have much mobility. This, on the other hand, this is actually the Z1, and you can start to see the greater. There we go. I'll get it. The greater mobility in this suit. You see, it has a highly mobile waist joint. Here, a highly mobile waist joint. It has hip bearings.
Yeah.
It has straddle joints. It has sizing elements. The knees are flat pattern joints. And of course, it has a bearing in the ankle, and the ankle has a multi-directional capability. That's very important for getting around on a planetary surface. Not so important for an EVA suit. Excuse me. You also notice that it has a rear entry closure. Uses a rear entry closure here.
I got you.
On this kind of suit. Let me show you.
The Russians do.
Well,
Artemis.
Yeah. That's the direction pretty much everything has been going, is towards a rear entry closure.
Gary, are the suits going to be different for 1/6 gravity on the moon and 1/3 gravity on Mars?
Well, I don't think you're going to see these suits ever used on Mars. I think that's too far down the road. Here's a rear entry closure that I built under NASA contract for University of North Dakota's Human Spaceflight Laboratory. You can see the hatch, the back hatch. Okay, that's the suit that's up there. Now, that's called the NDX-2. Here's a picture of the suit. You can see it.
Similar, but differences to the one we have
Yeah,
in the gallery.
it's similar. It's it's highly mobile. The hip joints are high, the hip sections are highly mobile on it. So that's the way they're going this with it's Keith up at ILC Dover. You can see the now that's a different, slightly different concept in that the upper torso is actually a soft upper torso. It doesn't use hard elements. Let's see.
There's Nicole Stott's in one there, a good friend of ours. What's she in there?
That's the Z1.
Z1.
That's an in-house built suit with NASA.
Okay.
And it's actually, well, ILC built a lot of it. So, yeah.
Here we got to show you off. There's Gary there. You can check out his mustache.
Yeah, we
in
actually,
there.
yeah, I got my mug in there, right?
Yeah.
We actually built the very first since Wiley Post, we built the very first all civilian intervehicular pressure suit.
Huh.
Yeah, that's me in the suit there on the side. It's designed to use different types of helmets. That's just one particular helmet design we were working on.
Oh, this is a Final Frontier.
Yeah,
version
that's one of the
maker.
subcontractors. That's Ted Southern, and one of his techs, the lady, it's one of his
The
techs.
ladies inside there.
They were
he's
showing
outside, and now he's inside.
It's the other way around
same
now.
Suit.
They're showing how the suit could be sized to a whole lot of different kind of people. That's
Yeah.
That's the first time they've ever had that kind of ability to do that in a suit. They're one of the contractors that's with Axiom.
Okay.
So-
Well, we've had some EVA walkers that couldn't do an EVA. I'm trying to think of the lady on the space station because she was too small to fit in the Russian spacesuit.
Yeah, too short. They used to
she's
call
way
her.
too
What was her
short.
name?
Yeah.
Too short. I can't remember.
And there's other instances like that where the suit just wasn't going to fit, so
Well,
they had to.
this suit that's going to be built now, the suit that will be built for the Artemis program is actually supposed to fit. One of the requirements NASA has is that it's supposed to fit from the 95th percentile Asian American female. I'm sorry, from the 5th percentile Asian American female up to the 95th percentile American male of
Oh.
European or African ancestry. I don't think they're going to achieve it.
Huh.
That's really hard. They tried that under Apollo and it just turned out to be too expensive. So we'll see if they take a different approach. I'm not Apollo. I'm sorry. Under Shuttle, they tried that.
Well, will
and
these
achieved it.
Artemis suits be used on the space station?
No. Or yes. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay.
Let me show
Well,
you.
you're showing us the architecture there still. So.
Yeah. I'm trying to go through this real fast. Here's what the suit would look like if it's originally how it was supposed to look when it was going to be used on space station. Now, if you look at the upper part, you'll notice that there's this part up here is the Artemis, okay, with a hard upper torso,
Mhm.
the Artemis EVA suit and rear entry closure. See it with the oval helmet. All right.
Right.
But the bottom is the Shuttle EMU.
Yeah.
So what they were going to originally do was to marry the in the short term was to marry the two programs kind of together. But I don't know, since it's went to these subcontractors, I don't know if that's going to be the plan now. I just don't know. So I
Is going to take some heavier.
it's going to be a lot more robust. Any
Robust,
suit
yeah.
system's going to be a lot more robust. You're going to have
Is this a moonwalking suit?
This is a suit that was built by one of the contractors that's had a proposal for this. Is Oceaneering International.
Mm-hmm.
Now Oceaneering,
Yeah.
they went with Collins Aerospace. This is a rear entry suit. Got an oval helmet. Got the double bubble inside the helmet. That's an interesting story
So
because
there's a bubble inside
a
the bubble
bubble.
for safety. So
Yes.
if you crack that outer face shield, you got.
that's what we're talking about, and
there.
having to be more robust.
Yeah.
And now here's an interesting story at a conference a couple of years back where I was there. I was talking to one of the NASA people from Crew Systems. I won't say who the person was, but I told him at that time, because you remember I was a commercial diver for 20 years, and when I used to design commercial diving equipment, and we always built it to a different standard. We didn't build it to where it was strong enough. We overbuilt it for a good reason. Because when you're down on the bottom, you want to have total confidence. You're sitting down there 600 feet breathing helium and oxygen, talking like Donald Duck, and they're pumping hot water around you to keep you from freezing to death.
Wow.
And you want that. You don't want just the equipment that is right and good. You want that stuff to be built to the point that you have total confidence. So it's a concept that we call build to total confidence. So I was trying to explain this concept to the NASA guy, and I said, what you need to do with this helmet is build a double bubble on the helmet, so that if the outside is in any way damaged, that your guy still has, your lunar walker still has total confidence that he's out there, because for a good reason. A person that has confidence, a person who's cautious, a person that believes in his equipment is going to be more productive than a person that's scared looking over his shoulder all the time. And you remember, all that's between him and being right out there in the vacuum is very little.
That's
Almost nothing. And he's going to go unconscious in 12 to 15 seconds. So if he's exposed to vacuum. So I said, let's use a double bubble in this. And he looked at me incredulously and said, well, why would we do that when the helmet that we've got now will bend 50 millimeters, that's 2 inches inward, when struck by a 10-pound weight? Why would we want to do that? Well, but I tried to explain to him about building the confidence, not necessarily, we're not necessarily putting it there because we don't think that the old standard wouldn't work. We're putting it there so that we have absolute confidence in the equipment that the guy's using.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, he turned and walked off, and a bit of hubris, I guess, on their part. And then I noticed now everything is a double bubble that they went with. Now, I didn't invent that concept. That was Joe Cosmo was the inventor of the idea.
Joe Cosmo.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, right.
This is Joe right
nice
here.
name, pretty cool name.
That's
That's
Joe
Joe
Cosmo
right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's when he was a young man.
Joe Cosmo.
That's
Marty.
That was one of Litton Industries' suits. Is one of its hard suits. It was going to be used on the moon as part of the Apollo
He's
applications
one of the legends
program.
of the spacesuit.
Oh yeah, he was one of the fathers, right up there with the rest of them. He's long retired now.
Oh, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. Talking with Gary Harris here, we're learning a lot about these spacesuits that we're going to use on Artemis. Very complex. Why not use a What is a mechanical counter pressure spacesuit?
Oh, that's a suit like you would see. You remember The Martian, where the guy that in The Martian, the movie The Martian.
Yes. Right.
Well, he was wearing
Matt
his tight.
Damon.
Matt Damon's wearing his tight, cool looking.
Right.
Suit,
Yeah.
Well, a mechanical counter pressure suit's where you replace the gas pressure in the suit with literally a fabric that would compress your body. Now,
Yeah, none of these suits look like the Martian suit. It looks like it's tailor made for him. Almost.
Yeah. Well, that's nice for a movie, I guess. The problem of it is that the reason we don't have mechanical counter pressure suits, and the reason I bring that up is that you always hear people saying, "Well, why is NASA still using these suits that look so big?" Well, because there is no such thing as a mechanical counter pressure suit that's workable yet. That's the problem. It's one of those technologies that's always like 20 years in the future. The first actual mechanical suits or mechanical counter pressure suits are what we used to call partial pressure suits. That was invented by Jim Hendry, a Canadian American, back in the 1940s, and it was used for years by the Air Force. The old S-1 partial pressure suits. I don't know if you remember them. The pilots that flew high altitude, and the ones that, for example, that flew the U-2 spy planes, they all wore the partial pressure suit. But the problem of it is those suits, they were uncomfortable. They didn't create an even pressure over the skin. I talked to some of the U-2 pilots that used those things, and the U-2 was notorious for losing its cabin pressure.
Oh,
and
really?
they would have to, that suit is only supposed to pressure up long enough to grip your body long enough to allow you to get down to a denser area of the atmosphere, and then it would relax back. It had a series of capstans that would pressure up, that would pull the suit tight on you. But the problem of it is, if they were flying over the Soviet Union, because you remember they used to fly out of Incirlik, Turkey, and then fly to Norway over the top of the Soviet Union back in the 50s and early 60s, but the trouble of it is, by the time they couldn't descend to a lower part of the atmosphere because then they come down into anti-aircraft gun zone.
Right.
So what they would do is they'd stay at high altitude with that suit, and by the time they got to Norway, they had blood whelps all over them, and their neck was bleeding and their wrist bleeding from these suits. So then in the 1970s, Dr. Paul Webb began research on mechanical counterpressure suits again, because it is a good idea if you think about it. Because if you get a hole in a mechanical counterpressure suit, who cares? You know, it's not going to lose gas pressure. You're not pressurized. The trouble of it is that there's never been a material that could create an even pressure over your whole body. For example, if you look at your arm, for example, it's not circular. It's actually kind of oval, isn't it?
Absolutely,
you sit there, it's oval.
yeah.
So on an oval structure, you'll get greater pressure here from something wrapped around it than you do here.
Right.
So what they would do is that in tests of these mechanical counterpressure materials, they'd end up being spotty. They'd get one pressure here and lesser pressure here and a greater one there. And that was really the lot of the trouble. And Dr. Paul Webb used women's hosiery type material, you know, like they use for, hosiery and as such. Matter of fact, they had to use 3 layers of it on some of the test subjects to get the pressure high enough, you see, so where it was anywhere near what a high altitude pressure suit would need. And it took like 3 big beefy guys to shake this little guy down into this thing, you know. So, and one time he passed completely out in it. So nobody's ever really found a way to accomplish this. Is the trouble. That's why we don't use them.
Well, Gary, the other day when I called you up because it was in the news and said, Gary, I'm confused. What about these space contractors with the spacesuits and all? And then I shot out there $3.5 billion for a spacesuit. That's the cost of one of our shuttles back in the 80s.
Yeah, give it a
But
year.
what'd you tell me?
Well, the trouble of it is that if you think about it, this money is actually going to be distributed up against what? I mean, how many contractors are there?
Yeah, you listed about 10.
There's going to be at least broken up amongst 10 contractors like that. So if you think about it, and that's over 10 years.
Okay.
So that means that's not particularly a lot of funding over the next 10 years, especially if you figure in inflation.
You actually told me it was a bargain that you could. How many suits could be built for that money, though? You think?
Well, remember again, NASA's not going to own these suits.
Right.
These, like you said earlier, these guys are going to build these suit systems, and then they're going to rent them to NASA. NASA's just going to rent the suit, and then when they're finished, NASA bring it back, and it'll be the responsibility of the owning contractor, whether it be Collins or Axiom Space. It'll be their responsibility then to maintain these suits. If you think about it, this is kind of something that NASA did in its past. If you look back at the X-15 program that NASA was involved in, some of the early high altitude and high speed aircraft, rocket powered planes, in the 1950s, NASA didn't own them. They were either owned by the Air Force or by the Navy, and the suit systems that were used in them were not owned by NASA. NASA only began to own a lot of its own equipment in the Mercury program. So in some ways they're reverting back to way NASA was, or the old NACA, that NASA sprang out of, because the NACA didn't own a lot of its own vehicles.
National Advisory Council on Aeronautics that preceded NASA. We appreciate Christopher Mick watching. He's an educator in Madison, Wisconsin, Gary. And Melissa Pope, get back to work. She's working as Space Coast Office of Tourism, does a lot of good things. Cynthia Rossi, thank you for being a faithful Stay Curious watcher. And our one of our number one guys, Dave Stange. Hope you're enjoying a beautiful summer evening up there in Michigan. And Space Resources is watching. James Sigler, thank you for watching. Sorry if you're experiencing any dropouts or things like that. We're not sure what's going on. A lot of things going on in our building, but not affecting our Wi-Fi. Gary, it struck me as you're talking about these spacesuits, the maintenance, the checking on them. We're going to need suit techs on the Gateway space station, maybe. And we've got a good suit tech that watches Stay Curious in Houston, Sharon McDougall. She worked on the shuttle spacesuits. But sounds like they need someone like Sharon on the gateway, or somebody trained to inspect these things.
I think eventually, yeah, I think you'll see when there's and this is my own opinion. This has
as that was mine.
nothing to do with the university or my employer. Yeah, I think when you see these things become more robust in the future, eventually there'll be suit technicians on the surface of the moon, and it'll be primarily their job to maintain
Wow.
these. Just as you have, for example, in any construction company, you have people who are mechanics that are there to make certain that all the equipment is running properly.
Absolutely, they're very important. The line or whatever assembly thing's going on
Yeah.
there. Did you have a couple more pictures to show, Gary?
Yeah, I was going to show
Marty,
that
gotta zoom down there.
the
Please, Marty. Thank you.
this
A little old school today on Stay Curious, the
The-
old way Marty and I did it. This is our 603rd episode,
Wow.
Gary.
that's a bunch.
You've been involved with 3 of them,
Yeah.
so
You
we
look on
appreciate
there.
that.
That's one of the early hard upper torsos.
Yeah,
That
sure
for the
is.
XEMU, you can see the
Well, the
XEMU's
purple color.
back over here. Well, that's yeah, that's because it's aluminum. The if you look on that one shoulder over here, you know how we were talking about Bill Elkins earlier. You
Yes.
see that's a rolling convolute.
Okay.
That it to show you something that the reason they're using a rolling convolute in the XEMU, and probably I think you'll see it used in this new suit, this Artemis suit as well, is it's one of the few joints that will work well at high pressures. They're talking about using this suit as high as 8.3 psi. Of course, that depends. That could easily change as
Mhm.
well too. But that's one of the reasons that the life support, for example, in this new suit is so much more expensive. Is it will have a multi-point regulator in it where you could dial different pressures. Now, originally it was going to have a lot of different pressures, but it'll only have now they're going to talking about having only a few pressures that can dial. So you could dial it down over a period of time, so you didn't suffer decompression sickness. But that's a whole nother
Yeah, a
complex
whole other
story.
world.
But I
there.
wanted to show you, if you look at that shoulder, this is one of Bill Elkins's inventions when he was at Lytton, a rolling convolute. It's called a stacked rolling convolute. So he was the inventor of that. But if you look on here, here's one of the suits that Lytton Industries built. Look on the shoulder there. Do you see that shoulder joint right there?
Yeah.
That's a rolling convolute. This is from
In the
1960s.
60s.
Yeah,
Wow.
1969, 1970, 1971. So what you're seeing there is some reuse of old technology
Yeah.
because it's just one of the best types of approaches to mobility in the shoulder.
Very
Of course,
interesting.
it's also got a rotational bearing. You can see the bearing here.
Going
know.
back a half a century to,
Yeah.
to find technology that we're going to use in space.
That good-looking guy right there without the mustache, that's me.
Okay.
Yeah.
When
This-
we were young.
You remember this fella here? He used to be with the Astronaut Hall of Fame. He was the director over there. This suit used to be in the basement of the Astronaut Hall of Fame.
Oh, did it really?
Till the Smithsonian found out about it and they grabbed it.
Oh my.
It's up in the Valley boxes now, up at the Paul Garber
Huh.
facility. But this suit was
Thank you, Marty.
it was a soft suit built by Lytton Industries. It was called the Advanced Extravehicular Suit. It's up at, I'll take that back. This suit may be up at the Visitors Center at Kennedy Space Center now. I can't remember.
The we were looking. Yeah.
This is the suit room. I can't remember that. It may be up there.
And if it is, it'd be over in the Saturn V area up there. So
Anyway, this is
couple more pictures here.
this is
from
kind
Gary.
of the morphology of what I suspect this new suit will end up looking like. Most folks have seen these pictures. These are kind of some screenshots I pulled. This was the XEMU. You saw that. You can see these on the internet. You can find them on the internet.
Now, is it dark so it doesn't show dark?
That's-
or
that's-
is there a real reason.
That
for
was kind of a Mars idea, a Mars outer layer idea, because on the surface of Mars, you really want to absorb sunlight.
Yeah.
Because you're only going to get about 50% of the sunlight. And Mars is the only time it's ever even anywhere near as warm as Earth is if you're right on the equator, right at the height of summer. And then it might hit 60 degrees Fahrenheit on a good day.
at the surface, but the
Right
top
at
of
the
your
surface.
head would be like
It'd be cold
zero.
again. That's right.
because
As
the
you
atmosphere is
come
so
upward.
thin.
Right. The atmosphere is only 7 to 10 torr. For example, the atmosphere you and I are in right now is 760 torrs, so that's about 1/100th.
What's Tor mean?
Well,
Just
yeah, Torricelli, Evangelista Torricelli, if you remember, he was the first guy to measure air pressure.
Oh,
That's where they
okay.
get the torr
It's an
from.
air pressure.
The 760 millimeters of
Just
mercury.
like Fahrenheit. It's Fahrenheit.
Well, we're in 14.7 pounds per square inch of pressure, so a torr would be far less than 1 pound. Put another way, let's see. Well, I don't want to go into kilopascals, but yeah, 760 millimeters of mercury is 14.7 pounds per square inch. So 7 to 10 torr, you can see, is hardly nothing. Matter of fact,
Yeah.
a 200-mile-an-hour wind on Mars would feel like a 15-mile-an-hour wind on Earth.
Really?
Yeah. So
Huh.
that's why the movie The Martian was kind of silly, because it showed this
Yeah.
wind
well,
getting ready to blow the spacecraft
yeah,
over.
that would never happen.
Yeah,
that was the one anomaly that
Yeah.
space geeks pointed out.
Anyway, you can see the in this, you can see it has the rear entry closure.
Mhm.
It has the oval helmet, double bubble helmet. That
Yeah.
shows you some of the mobility in the suit. It's a highly mobile suit.
Very mobile.
Yeah. Amy Ross was in charge of this program back in those days. She was one of
Jerry Ross's
Jerry
daughter.
Ross's daughter, and
seven-time
I think
astronaut.
she started off. She's an excellent engineer. You can see there some of the mobility. It's got a waist bearing, a rotational waist bearing. She's an excellent engineer, and I think she started off with the right idea. She
Mhm.
started off kind of doing it backwards and trying to make it fit small women first, and then working up, sizing it up, because it's much easier to do that than it is to make it fit a large man and then try to size it down. And I can tell you from years of experience in designing life support equipment, it was smart of Amy to start with the smaller sizes and worked her way up.
And who's
And,
Amy Ross work for?
She's Crew Systems Division, or she was.
Okay,
I don't
she's-
know. I don't, like I said, everything kind of
And
got.
her dad, Jerry, 7 times in space. I forget how many spacewalks, but he's up there, one of the top 10 of that. So we've really enjoyed a great conversation with you, Gary. You are a warehouse of information. This man knows what he's talking about because he's built. What have you built? 9 spacesuits, and then some mini ones, and
Including intravehicular systems, yeah, our launch entry systems, yeah. It's been 9, yeah.
Yeah, and I regret I didn't pull off pictures of one of your earlier visits here where he's got these little 2-foot models that you've made before.
Since I'm retired, I kind of make those as a sort of a hobby.
Little mad money there. Marty, we got anything to button up here?
Yeah, we got 2 questions. Robert Law asking, can you say anything about the Major Matt Mason spacesuit, which is on the picture with rubber joints to the right of Yuri Gagarin?
Yeah, that was the Matt Mason suit was.
Thank you, Robert, for the question.
It was based. It was a toy, but it was based. If I remember right, it was called the 143 training suit. It was one of the really early suits based on. If I remember properly, it was either Hamilton Sunstern or B.F. Goodrich was participating in the program in those days. Ultimately, that particular suit was not used for Apollo. Like I said, it was very early in the program. You're talking about like 1964. It wasn't used because the shoulder joints were so large on it that the problem was you only had 23 inches in the Apollo couch. And
Wow.
if you see this suit here, it had
Right.
the same problem. With that 23 inches, even with the 23 inches, if you look at the guys in the Apollo program, they were still, the 2 outer guys were laying their shoulders on top of the inner guy almost. So it was so crowded inside there that it couldn't fit that particular standard that NASA was requiring. Ultimately, the A7L, or actually originally the A5L, that was built by ILC was the one that finally fit that smaller requirement, and even then it was pretty crowded inside those launch couches. But that was what that was. That was what that toy was based on. I got one at home. Somebody gave me one. My daughter.
Marty, another question?
Yeah, Larry Puskar is asking, why do you need to dial it to a different pressure? That's on that one.
Oh boy.
The question. Repeat the question there from Larry, and I'm going to grab something.
Why do you need to dial it to a different pressure?
Well, Boy, that's complicated. I would say that if you could afford to buy my book, it goes into decompression theory and that explains it. The trouble of it is that it depends on the temperature or the pressure of the habitat or spacecraft you're working from. But when you get into a suit, you're going down to a lower pressure as a rule. Now, I've heard that the Orion spacecraft is going to have a cabin pressure of 9.3 psi. That's what I've been told. The You don't really need that high pressure if you're going to go to the moon because you're going to be divorced from the Earth's atmospheric pressure for quite a while. The problem of it is that the air that you and I breathe is made up of 21% oxygen and 78% nitrogen and about 1% trace elements, like argon and moisture and such. And the trouble of it is that nitrogen, I know this is awfully technical and that's why I didn't go into it too much earlier, but that nitrogen doesn't really get metabolized. We metabolize the oxygen. At a cellular level, we sort of chemically combine the food we eat with the oxygen that we breathe in and it burns. We're like literally heat engines. We produce about 90 watts of waste heat energy just sitting here, you and I do. And the problem of it is the nitrogen doesn't get metabolized. It just stays in our blood and our tissue. And if we suddenly lower the pressure on ourselves, then that nitrogen comes out of solution. It's a little bit like taking a Mountain Dew drink and shaking it up and you see those bubbles in there. Well, that's what happens if you lower that pressure and you don't do it slowly over, a period of time to allow it to slowly come out of solution. That's called nitrogen tension. This is one of my areas of expertise, by the way. That's why, for example, you hear about divers using decompression chambers or hyperbaric chambers. The trouble is that if that comes out of solution, those bubbles will lodge in to muscles and they can lodge in your spine, causing type 2 decompression sickness, which can affect your brain and your spine and your ability to walk. So when you go, there's talk about the Artemis suit, the Artemis EVA suit, going at 8.3 psi. Now the reason they're talking about that is because that leaves you with something called an R factor, or a decompression factor, if you want to use that term, of only 1.3. In other words, you'd only be dropping down that much from the original cabin pressure. Mm-hmm. The shuttle suit, for example, right now uses 4.3 pounds per square inch of pure oxygen, but this new suit will be using an oxygen-nitrogen mix. So there we have the problem of nitrogen, you see, in the bloodstream that can come out of solution. So we end up having to, the problem of it is that 8.3 psi that the new Artemis suit would be using, that high pressure like that, it makes the gloves harder to work. And the gloves have always been one of the areas that's been the hardest to tackle. They're even today with the Phase 6 shuttle glove and the gloves that by the way, Final Frontier Design is building, and they're an excellent group of designers down there. Nick and I both worked together on a glove project years ago. Nick Moiseev, who's a Russian that immigrated to the United States, I helped him immigrate here. He and Ted have built some excellent glove concepts, but it's still one of the really tough parts of a suit. It wears. The trouble is your human hands, the muscles in them are very weak, and not everybody has the same hand strength. Women have smaller hands, some men larger hands. And on top of that, we get a lot of our hand motion. If you look right here on my hand, I don't know if you can show it to you, but I'm one of the few people that has something. It's kind of weird. If you look on my left hand, when I use my finger and take it across to here, you don't see anything sticking up. You don't see a tendon sticking up. Well, those tendons operate our hand. We don't really have many muscles in our hand. We have.
Yeah, mine are sticking out there.
Yeah, okay, so you have something that's unusual. You see, if we go right here and I run this across and I do that, and then there it is. Do you see that?
Right, yeah.
Okay, that's called your climbing tendon. That's left over from our ape ancestors.
Really?
Yeah. Not everybody has one. See, you have two, a very pronounced one. See, on my left, I don't have any.
Wow. Mine are really
only something like 1 in 200 people have that.
1 in 200,
Yeah.
Marty. I'm ape-like. You too? All right.
So
He does 100 pull-ups a
well,
day.
there you go.
Yeah.
But see, our hands
I know,
operate.
He's really ape-like.
Our hands operate off these tendons, but the
Oh,
muscles that are in
yeah.
our hands itself are actually, it's these tendons that operate your hands.
Mhm.
You see, so it's very easy to get these things to where they start to cramp using those gloves very much, EVA gloves,
Right.
because the pressure, you find the pressure. So if we go with 8.3 psi in the Artemis suit, that means that eventually, as you're using a suit on the lunar surface and your body, it degasses more and more of that nitrogen as you
Mhm.
breathe it off, okay? Uh, in the lower pressure of the suit until the nitrogen tension, the nitrogen pressure in your bloodstream actually starts to level out with the same pressure, the nitrogen pressure in the suit. Then you can you can dial down that pressure a little more to where your gloves operate better. So, and then you can dial it down even a little more after that if you need to. And the second reason that they have for making a multi-step regulator is that nobody's actually sure really what is the best pressure combination to use, and this way it'll allow them to dial that around to do experiments to see what really is the best pressure combination. I know that probably makes it about as, without going into all the physiology in it, that makes it about as clear as mud, I guess. But
Well, no, it's technical things are technical, and we're blessed to have somebody like you involved in the museum. Here you are with Bill Elkin there. I wanted to kind of you pointed out to this picture the late Scotty McLeod. We miss you, Scotty. He passed away a year ago. You said that's a B.F. Goodrich suit from 1960s. He was Scotty was a Grumman
suit tech,
test astronaut.
He actually a test pilot.
Yeah, test pilot's what they called him at Grumman, and he was a test astronaut pilot over the crew that did everything in the lunar module and then told the astronauts what to do. Scotty, we
he
missed
worked
you.
with George Smythe. I don't know if you remember George Smythe.
Heard that name.
Yeah.
Heard that name. There's Scotty there. You autographed that. We lost
You can
him
see
about a
how
year
large the shoulder joints are.
Absolutely, yeah. We were talking about the shoulder joints. You're referring to that picture there, and
Now that did use a lot of it used
Thank you, Marty.
what they call dip molded convolutes in
mhm.
the Apollo suit. So it did use some of those, but it used a very different type of joint in the shoulders.
Well, Gary, it's always fascinating to bring you into our Stay Curious studios, and I appreciate you being there when I call up and ask you silly questions. What a good program here of where we're going. Again, where we're going, they don't always know. Think about walking on the moon. All right. When the Buzz Aldrin was going around circles trying to practice, he was going left to right, left to right. Yet Bill Elkins, that we just put Bill's picture up there, he told everybody that the bunny hop was going to be the way to go on the moon.
Yeah.
And it ended up being that.
I have
Correct?
films of Bill doing the bunny hop in one of the, what was it, KC 130?
Oh, really?
KC 135, I don't remember. Yeah, he
In
was
the 60s, right?
I have pictures, I have films of Bill in doing the bunny hop way back there in like 1966,
Huh.
and he figured out real quick that it would be so much easier to use that waist joint in the suit than it would be to use your hips, your hip
Uh-huh.
joints. It was easier to activate that waist joint. One of the reasons the mobility was so poor in the A7, A7L suits was because
The Apollo suits.
the Apollo suits. Yeah, was that on Earth you got that one G here, and you got all that weight from your waist up that you can use to break over those joints. It will cause those to initiate the motion that's called breakover. But on the moon, you don't have that extra weight to cause that, even with the backpack, to cause those joints to break over. So if you watch when Buzz Aldrin's taking motion pictures of Neil coming down the ladder, Neil's stiff. He's really stiff, you know. And yeah, so that's why the bunny hop was much easier. Two things easier was the bunny hop and running.
Running was easier.
Yeah, I
too.
suspect because the running motion, you were making a leap, and when you hit the ground, it gave you enough inertia to cause that knee joint to break over when they were running.
We're hopefully going back to the moon the next 3 or 4 years to learn all of that. We got the rocket on the pad over there, just 9 miles away from where we're sitting in the American Space Museum, where we take pride in preserving the birth of the American space age right here in this delivery room, Gary, Brevard County, Florida. And thank you again for what you've done for us. And we have on loan one of his beautiful suits in the room. I apologize, I took some pictures and didn't put them in our rack them up here. Marty, we got anything else to take care of?
Yep, we're good.
We'll check into our little hiccups there. And tomorrow we're going to catch up with the shuttles of June, it being June 30th. We'll look at the 11 space shuttles of June. Then Thursday, got a special guest, Mr. Jay Honeycutt, former Kennedy Space Center director, is going to be here to talk about the day that NASCAR came to NASA to solve their heating problem in the driver's cockpits. And with the Daytona 500, Firecracker 400, they used to call it, at Daytona this coming up weekend, I called Mr. Honeycutt to come in and tell us that story that he has some personal things about. And so you want to catch Jay Honeycutt Thursday, and Friday, of course, Tales from the White Room with Triple T to round out our Stay Curious week. We're so appreciative that you're following us, liking us, sharing us, and subscribing to us. Watch us on YouTube. We've monetized YouTube. I think we've made $76 since April. Big. We might make $2 or $3 off you today,
Big
Gary.
money.
We'll see. But thank you, Marty, for all that you do today. Every day's an adventure in this Streamlabs world. Those perfect one day you show up and everything's can be different. So on behalf of our museum here that we're going through some renovations, we've got our conference room shut down, it's being drywalled. We're getting ready in the middle of July to put new carpet in our beautiful, that'll make our museum just more beautiful. Can't wait for that. And we hope that you will book a tour here in our museum soon, this summer or fall. And thank you, all of our staff here, for always rallying around our Stay Curious program to make it a good program for you out there. So thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you. We'll have you back
Welcome.
again. Great program as usual with Gary Harris. And until we come back tomorrow, I'm Mark Marquette asking you to bridge the space between us.